Welcome to the Soft Matter Show. This is Amal Narayanan. I'm a chemist and a polymer scientist. In this podcast, we will talk about soft matter science and have fireside chats with the researchers. Please enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of the Soft Matter Show. Our today's guest is Dr. Marleen Kamperman. Marleen is a professor of polymer science at the University of Groningen, Holland. She is an award-winning scientist in her outreach activities, and we cover a spectrum of topics in this conversation. Marleen talked about her thoughts on the importance of outreach in elevating diversity in science. We discussed her passion for bioinspired materials and what Marleen looks for while hiring Ph.D. students and postdoctoral trainees. She also shared her thoughts on the similarities and the differences between the creative processes involved in arts and science. With that, please enjoy this episode. We have Dr. Marleen Kamperman here with us today. Marleen is a professor of polymer science at the University of Groningen, Holland. Marleen is a chemist and a biomimicry enthusiast. Marleen's group works on bio-inspired synthetic solutions for resolving problems in the field of material science. Marleen is a prolific researcher with extraordinary publication records. She is a recipient of the Kncb Award from the Royal Netherlands Chemical Society. Now, let's hear from Marleen. Welcome to the Soft Matter Show, Marleen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking
nice
the time.
Introduction.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, like in terms of the outreach activities that you do. So recently you received, not recently, maybe like 2 years ago, you received an award called Kncb Award. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so indeed, it's an award for people that bring chemistry, because it's from the Chemistry Society, to a broader audience, and typically those are chemistry teachers, actually. So I was one of the few to receive it in academia, but it's true that I really like to spend time on telling my what I like about my science to a general audience. So like school kids, but also people that are just interested in hearing about something else than what they typically hear about, also at festivals or at other occasions. So it's true that I do that often, and I like that, and that's why I got this award.
Yeah, that is exciting. So congratulations on the award, by the way. So
Thanks.
One of the things I want to ask is there a method that you follow that helps people to get educated towards the science so that they follow a certain passion towards science? Is that important to you?
You mean as in whether I make them follow a path? I'm not completely sure if I understand what you're
Yeah, so
asking.
my question is like, what is the end goal of your outreach activities?
Yeah, I think, well, it's basically, I wasn't really starting outreach because I really had this philosophy, oh, this is really what I want to achieve. It was more that I really liked it, and it was giving me energy. But I do, because I've now been doing this for quite some years, I do think that indeed one of the goals is to show that science is super diverse. So it's not only, I think I have a son myself, so then you see these kids programs and the professor is still the man with the gray hair, and that stereotype, I think, is, it's wrong and makes people think, oh, chemistry is boring and it's not much fun. So I think it's important to tell that lesson and show, hey, it can also be all kinds of people that are doing science, and it's also not so strict in terms of, oh, you have to be super good in chemistry, and it can actually also be a little bit of biology, and it can be all kinds of things. And of course, history is also part of what we teach in the university. So I think that diversity is really one of the main messages that I have, and then that it's actually a lot of fun. It's really about curiosity, and I think I can be enthusiastic about my research. So that's also, I think, very important, that I try to and make them enthusiastic about science in general.
Yeah, that is a very good way of thinking about it, because when we go for an outreach activity, it's a lot more fun, because the way kids or even families learn. So we do some kind of outreach in our part of my PhD as well. We went to a school.
Mm-hmm.
I think the family are the people who are the middle-aged, or the parents are the people who enjoy the most during an outreach activity than the kids sometimes I feel. So it is an exciting thing to communicate. I mean, I love communicating science, which is one of the reasons why we started this podcast as well. So
Exactly. Yeah.
What are some of the specific activities that you have done in the past in terms of the outreach?
Yeah. So one thing that which was somewhat different than really going to schools, was actually writing columns in a national newspaper, and that was also really fun and exciting to do, because then I was not only writing about my own science, but about science policy and what I think should change in Holland. So it was really giving me the opportunity to also speak about how we organize the university, and what is not going in the right direction and what is going in the right direction. And that was also really, of course, on a different level, engaging many different people, because I was not expecting that there would be so many people actually reading these columns and commenting on it. So that was also a lot of fun. And I was doing that together with my husband, because I can write, as in science publications, but really writing for a newspaper, that's a different story. And that was also a lot of fun because we don't really collaborate in any way, because he's a novel writer, so it's very different. And then, but this time we did this together, so that was nice. But then in general, I think what I do is going to schools, so elementary schools, and for example with a part of the Dutch Academy of Sciences, we made a comic, and then that is distributed in elementary schools, and that's again also about diversity of scientists, so that it can be anybody, and it's a cool, nice story that they can read. So those kind of things. So and also like festivals that we visit or I visit, and actually then I lecture about the plastic soup and those kind of topics. So I think it gives me a lot of energy to do it. So that's why I like it.
So the comic that you're talking about, is it available online, or is there a place I can share this to the community?
Yeah, no, definitely. I can send you the webpage, but it's in Dutch.
Sure. I think we can try the best to translate it, I guess. All right, that is
Sure.
exciting. I mean, that is a wonderful part to do. I mean, I have not met many people who are this passionate about doing what you like, doing the outreach. So, one of the things, I want to dissect the answer that you have just conveyed in terms of what you wrote in the newspaper. So, what are the things which is going right or wrong in the science field?
Yeah, so I think of course it's slightly different between countries, but what I do appreciate that is going a little bit in the right direction is that people realize it's not all about the quantity of publications that you should obtain, but it's much more about the quality, and also how we judge the tenure trackers, that we really focus much more on what have they really realized in terms of impact, and not so much, okay, did you just fulfill the list of criteria in terms of how many publications you have. So I think that is going in the right direction, that people realize that more and more. But I also think that still there is a lot of pressure, and again this diversity aspect comes in, that I think in Holland at least you have to be a tenure tracker, and then you have to be good at everything at the same time. So you have to be a great teacher, you have to do very good in research, and you have to do that fast. So you have to develop yourself really fast, and there is not a lot of room anymore for people that are good in a particular aspect. So if you're really, for example, good more on a technical part, that you're really good in developing setups, and that you're maybe not really achieving or getting all the grant income. So that's I think that's not a good idea, that you really focus on this one type of researcher that flourishes, but then there is not so much room for diversity. So everybody has to be good at everything. So I think that's therefore, in well, in older days, then there was more room to just have a professor, but also have some people besides him working and actually maybe not achieving everything at the same time, but maybe at a little bit slower pace. And I think that's underappreciated right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. That gives me a lot of aspects to think about. So one of the things you were talking about the diversity, right? So you wanted to communicate that professor is not about that white gray-haired man. So how did you get inspired then? Like, how did you get inspired to go and pursue this path without seeing a lot of examples?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I did always like biology, and I was curious, but I don't really have examples in my family, because they don't none of them really went to the university or got worked as a professor. So in my family, my brothers and sisters, they did get a university degree, but they didn't really end up in academia. So it was indeed not really obvious that I got inspired by people in that regard. I did have a great chemistry teacher in high school, and I think that helps to make a choice to study chemistry. And I did like the topics. So for me, that was more of the inspiration, that I really liked the biology and the chemistry and the physics, and not so much the examples that I saw at different places, because they weren't really there. And I do think that indeed helps. That I also see that around me, that people are realizing quicker. And actually in Holland, the number of people that attend the university is growing. So it's actually more and more people that are getting a university degree. But I think indeed that also definitely helps to see them more around you. And I do think that is changing also on television, that you see many more people, and also more diverse people, and also in diverse fields. So that it's also, because of course I'm a chemist, but I also think in Holland it's underestimated that if you are a psychologist, or that it's also part of doing research, right? And that's also I think important to realize that philosophy and languages, that's also part of what you can study. So diversity means a lot of things to me.
Yeah, that is I can completely agree with the statements that you have made. So in terms of you like when I talk to many scientists across the globe, or like people who are made in academia or even industry, like high positions in terms of the R&D. So one of the things they end up saying is that they get inspired by one of the high school teacher, or one of the even for me, it was like one of the high school teacher who inspired me to pursue the chemistry, even though I was not great at it. So one of the reasons I'm bringing this point up is because what are some of the points, or some of the features that you adapt while you teach, so that this inspiration stays up?
Yeah, I think it's something that I definitely also admired from my PhD advisor. He was always super enthusiastic, and if I would not be completely satisfied with my results, I would just go to him and I would be enthusiastic again about my research. And that's, of course, what I also try to do. That indeed, I think it's much more about showing your enthusiasm about a topic. And I think also when I teach, of course, the closer to my research it is, actually the easier that's just pops out, right? That you are saying like, oh, this is fantastic, and look at this, and also these natural examples. I think they're great. So I think then for me it's almost automatic. But I do think that is key. You have to be motivated, and you have to be enthusiastic. And I think in terms of teaching, then it helps if you also can somehow show them and actually make them feel that it is something to be enthusiastic about. So what I really like is, especially when it's more like a master level course, that they also either think about a project themselves, or whether they actually also at least read and show what is good about a scientific paper, so to really have them experience why things are so nice and beautiful. And then I think that's actually the best way to get enthusiastic yourself.
Yeah, nature is a mystery of science, actually. So I had previously Niels and other bio-inspired materials people coming into the show, and they had talked about their share of bio-inspiration. So I will come back to the bio-inspiration of your research as well. So before that, let me go back in timeline and ask you, what made you inspired to come to the US for your PhD?
Yeah, also a good question. So when I ended up in Holland, you do your master's degree first, and then you go on to do a PhD. So I was done with my chemistry master's, and then I was not sure when I was doing my master's whether I wanted to do a PhD or whether I wanted to go to industry. And then during my master thesis, I really realized, doing research is not boring. You're not doing the same thing all day, and it's actually something exciting if you find something that you haven't figured out before. So let me do a PhD. So that was the first decision. And then I did think, I've been now in this country and in this place for quite some time. To make it a little bit more exciting, let me go to another country. And then I did think about different countries also in Europe, but because actually the process to go to the United States was kind of lengthy. You know all about it. So, and I thought, now let me go there anyway. So I really want to go. And on top of that, another motivation was that my husband right now, but then at that time, my boyfriend, he had this thing about the United States. So he was always into basketball and baseball and everything, and also all the music. So he had this preference also to also go to the United States. And I have to say that I didn't know too much about the United States. I've never been there before. But then as soon as I started to look into it and to apply for these grad schools, then I really realized, these people are so motivated and they would answer so rapidly. So in Holland, you can wait for a week and stuff like that. So here, the energy, I think, was also, and that people are super motivated. That's kind of idea that was really compelling for me to go to the United States.
Nice. That's a very good way of thinking about it. Yeah, it is true that where people are very fast and motivated to in working here, which is one of the reasons why I also ended up coming here, I think. So in the past in the show we had Niels, or we had someone where people like that who have worked in all parts of US for their PhD, postdoc, and right now where they're working. For you, it's even crazier. You have been, you worked, you start from Netherlands, you went to United States, then you went to Germany, then you came back to the Netherlands. It's almost like, completing a circle. So how was your, how was your experience in working in Germany as a postdoc?
Yeah, that was also, it was indeed closer to home than the United States. And the funny thing is that when I was in the United States, I was there for 5 years, and then people kind of in the US consider it as being Europe, right? So then for them, it was more like, you're going back. So that was actually for me, because I had been in the United States also more like that I was actually going back, so to Europe. And it was, of course, still different from Holland. I think actually the differences between countries in Holland or in Europe are larger than the differences between states in the US. Although people advise me, you should only go to the West Coast and don't go to the East Coast. But I didn't listen to that. So of course there are differences there too. But in Germany, I do think that Germany and Holland are pretty similar. I had a PhD supervisor in the US, and he would always say, Holland is actually a state from Germany. It's part of it. But it's, of course, there are slight differences. But there, I think it's also somewhat different if you are in an academic environment. So for me, then, because it's always so international, I'm at ease pretty quickly and at these different places. And Germany, I actually had a great time there. So for me, it's also, of course, related to the group and how things are going in terms of what your environment is. But culturally, I think that Germany and Holland are, for me, not so different.
Mm-hmm. So do you speak German or?
Yeah, so I think if you Dutch is kind of, I always say, if you speak German and you speak English, then Dutch is somewhat in between, which is not completely true, but it's much easier for Dutch people than for many other people to speak. It's comparable maybe to Spanish and Italian, something like that.
So during my master's, like in between my master's, I got an opportunity to go to Shanghai for attending a conference. That's when I decided I'm not going to do my PhD in non-English speaking country. So, so that is one hell of an experience when people do not want to talk to you because you're trying to talk to a language that people don't know. So yeah, for you, it never would have happened because you understand the language. So
it's different for sure. Yeah, we did live in because the Germans where I was right at the border between France and Germany. So we lived in France, and then I worked in Germany, and my French is horrible, so I can totally understand what you're saying.
All right. Yeah. So let me come back to the bio-inspired part of it. So you were a chemist, right? So from I grew up in a lab during my undergrad in a lab which had dominantly chemistry-based procedures, like people work on organometallic catalysis. People try to make the n number of stereo centers in a molecule, create natural products. How did you get inspired? I did my PhD. I did my PhD in polymer science, so it has had a translation. How did you get inspired in bio-inspired materials, being from a chemistry background?
Yeah, so actually for me it's more maybe a valid question. Why did you study chemistry and not biology? Because I liked biology when I was in elementary school, and then I had to speak about a certain topic. I would always choose like trees or flowers or something, or animals. So I think why I chose chemistry was more because I thought, that's somewhat more difficult. So let me challenge myself and let me do this. And in the end, I actually already knew when I was going to do my PhD, I really wanted to go into this bio-inspired materials field. And as a PhD, I was making nanostructured materials, and it was somewhat inspired by the structures that you see in the diatoms. For example, you have these skeleton that are beautifully organized, and that is also due to the protein self-assembly that governs the structure formation. And that was also somewhat related to what I was doing. In the end, it was not all that bio-inspired in the end, but it was one of the motivations, and that was one of the things that got me attracted to that research. So I already had that from pretty early on, and then as a postdoc, I went much more clearly into this bio-inspired field, but I already had that sort of wish a longer time.
Yeah. So what are some of the exciting projects that you are dealing with in your lab right now?
Yeah, so we are, like you, we are really focusing a lot on adhesives that stick well on wet surfaces. But I'm getting more and more interested in also the process itself. So I think the example there is spider silk, so that you really go from an aqueous solution with all these proteins that are dissolved at that point, but then within milliseconds somehow change in terms of self-assembly and really transition into this water-resistant fiber by changing very gradually the environmental and conditions. So I think that whole process is super fascinating, and I think that is also valid for the underwater adhesives. There you also, and I think there are some biologists that are doing great research on getting to better understanding in that process. So for me, that this self-assembly in time, I think, is super fascinating. So that's one of the transitions that we're currently a little bit making, that we are still super interested in optimizing the bio-inspired adhesive systems, but we're also fundamentally interested in the processing of these protein-based materials that are made in nature.
Yeah, that is superb, because I have a strong interest in this field as well. So the people who are not familiar with spider silk or bio-inspired materials, you can find YouTube videos where it is so exciting to see how the spider silk changes from a simple liquid to a fiber. It's like a very
Yeah.
fast step, and literally there's no changes in chemistry. It's more of a physical phenomena, but still chemistry plays a huge role in terms of determining the strength of the silk. And the another factor which excites me the most in that is the way the glue droplet, the spider glue droplet, is arranged on those spider silk. It's exciting to. Oh, it's a wonderful thing to actually view. And I mean, if somebody can mimic that, that would be a fantastic way of going towards a very strong materials as well as sticky material, which are two counterintuitive properties, right? Yeah, so that is superb. So can you tell me a little bit more about the adhesive per se? Like, what are the applications, or what are the real goal behind creating new adhesives which can work on wet surfaces?
Yeah, so initially we were thinking mainly about biomedical applications, and of course that still is a very logical choice. So what we were interested in, and we're still interested in, is really designing something that starts out as a liquid. So that's really common in all these natural systems, because they have to produce it somehow in their body, and then secrete it, and then somehow transition into a solid. And that's also something that we are still using for now the more applied parts as well. So we have glues that switch from fluid to solid in based on temperature, but also based on salt concentration. So you start out with a different salt concentration, much higher, and then by just applying it, and then the salt diffuses out, and you make a hard material. And that can be applied for different kinds of applications. So what we are really interested in right now is, for example, seaweed cultivation. And we didn't come up with that ourselves, but there was a company that said, hey, we also need adhesives that stick well in wet conditions. And actually, again, I thought only about biomedical applications, but there are plenty of people that need adhesives that stick well on wet surfaces. And there, I think it's really a great application, because they need something that is that can attach the small seedlings from the seaweed onto a rope, and then they need to start growing themselves onto the rope, and then they don't need the glue anymore. So it's something that is needed for a week or two, and then it also, of course, is going to end up in the ocean. So you do want to have a glue that is not going to add to the plastic soup. So you want something that is biodegradable, at least, and of course, the best would be biopolymers. And I think that's nice about how we started, that we really started pretty fundamental, that we really understood, okay, if we combine these polymers and we are using polyelectrolytes, then we know, okay, how to make it more viscous or more elastic. And now, because we have this idea about, okay, if we want to get an underwater adhesive, we need these ingredients. So now we can really apply it. And that's really fun to make it more applied for that particular application, but also for certain membranes where they want to produce electricity by mixing fresh and salt water. Then you can generate electricity by making the ions selectively flow through a membrane. And then actually they also want to glue these membranes under wet conditions, because that works the best. And then these glues are also super useful. So there ends up being quite some applications that we're moving towards, and in the biomedical field as well, where we, for a skin transplantation, are also thinking about using our glue. So, and I think that's super exciting. I really think that's great, that if we now can, in the end, someone, I don't know who, but I think it will be very nice if somebody's using it.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the challenges that we have had in terms of, my experience with working with the underwater or wet adhesive is that to pinpoint one specific application so that we can pursue that path. I mean, maybe, I think the seaweed, seaweed culture sounds like a very exciting opportunity, especially because they are the one who is more interested. So the problem sometimes happens when you are the one who is interested and you have the material where to put it, right? So let me think about the lab, your research lab, or the culture that you're cultivating in your lab. So let's say a PhD student joins your lab, new student. So what are the work workflow look like? Like how much the reason why I ask is like you have very interdisciplinary lab. So for example, for me also, I mean, I also did some amount of interdisciplinary research, which took some amount of work in the chemistry lab, some amount of work in the spectroscopy, some amount of work in physics or like measurement. So what does a typical flow of workflow look like in your lab?
So I think that really depends. So I kind of course, try to look for the right candidate for a particular project. So if it's much more synthesis based, then I do need somebody that likes that, of course. But it's true that you're right that most of the projects that will have and some polymer synthesis and some adhesion characterization and also additional things. So that's true. So then that can be involving different aspects, and then it depends on where we want to start, where we start. But it's also actually in our current lab that the nice thing, because we have expertise in all these different areas, that we do have people that really only focus on the synthesis and really help the PhD students that just start with getting up and running in their synthesis skills. So actually, there's not one particular flow. It really depends on who is coming and what their interest is, and especially also for bachelor and master students, because we in Holland you always do your master's degree. So actually, that's a quite significant part of your education is doing almost a year of thesis, and then I actually always, the first thing I ask, what do you like? What type of research would you like to do? And then that can always basically be accommodated. So for me, it's not some certain scheme that they follow. So they will come in, and I think what is the main thing is that the main goal is to become an independent researcher. So initially it will be much more talking with me, and that I also tell, well, maybe you can try this. But then over time, it becomes much more the other way around. And then they say, well, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Let's try this. And I think that's great, right? That's the best thing that can happen, that in the end they leave and it doesn't matter where they end up, but that they really feel like, hey, I learned a lot, and I think I can design my research myself. So it's not much about the type of research. I think that really varies, but it's much more that I think that's the main goal of doing a PhD, that you become an independent thinker and researcher.
So yeah, that is very exciting way of thinking about it. So let me ask you this, like in terms of the students, like how, since we are talking about like you get students for coming in, then you have a initial questionnaire session. So how do you determine, or what are the things that you look for when you're hiring someone?
I think motivation is the most important quality. So I think it's right now, for example, we have bachelor students coming in and they don't have any experience in the lab because we had Corona last year, so then they couldn't do lab courses. But that doesn't matter. So I think if you don't really have the skills yet, that's the time to learn. So I think it's much, much more important that you are motivated to do the work. And I think for your PhD, it's even more important, because there you really also have times where you think, okay, for who am I doing this? And then it's important to get to know yourself, how to become motivated again. So that's definitely number one. And then I of course I value people that are motivated also to do work and to be creative and to come up with ideas and to that they know what they're working on, so that they're skilled. But I also really look for team players. So I think the social cohesiveness in my group is super important. I really have a great team of people, and I really enjoy every time I have a meeting with them, because it's fun. So I think that's also, and maybe I'm not even looking for that too consciously. It's much more that I have a good click with that person, and that most of the time means that person also values those kind of those things in a group too.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it is important to be a part of the team, because rather than probably the individual knowledge or the skill set, it's probably the team play, which I believe is a key factor which determines that person's productivity towards the lab. So
yeah, exactly.
So how about your mentoring? Like, let's say you are trying to get a PhD student in your lab. So what are the mentoring philosophy that you have? What do you want them to achieve at the end of the 5 year by staying in your lab? I don't know, it's 5 year in Netherlands to begin with.
Yeah, it's 4 years.
Okay.
So yeah, I think, well, like I said, the overall goal is really to become an independent researcher. So I think what sometimes I hear is that they feel that they have to figure out things themselves pretty quickly, and I think that's true. So I think I kind of I maybe you also adopt a little bit the style from your own PhD supervisor. So my supervisor in the US, he was always making people just wander around basically in their first year to really find the right research questions that they really wanted to study. And then after the first year, he would become very serious. And I think I don't do the same, because here it's a 4-year program, so you have to be more efficient in that regard. But still, I do think that I value that people come with their own ideas and that I actually let them develop those ideas. So I'm for sure not a micromanager. So I think it's much more important to be the owner of your ideas, because that's really the way, and I also think that's in teaching also true, that's the way you become motivated. And that's really when you realize, hey, I also want to be a researcher. If it's only ideas from your supervisor, then you never really have the feeling, oh, that's really something I want to do. I think it's really, and I had that at least in my PhD, the moment I thought, oh, that maybe we can try this, and then when it works, that's the feeling that you want to feel, and then you realize, oh, that's actually a lot of fun. So I think that's my philosophy the most, that they get enough chance to come up with creative ideas themselves.
Yeah, it's perfect. So I mean, I'm not very aware of the University of Groningen's admission policies, or can you tell me about how people can apply for master's or PhD or even a postdoc program in your lab?
Yeah, so it's indeed different from the US, because you don't apply for the grad school. You basically apply for a position directly. So in that regard, it's really something that you have to look for, and that people advertise much more, because the only way I can hire a new PhD or a postdoc is when I have money available, funding to support that project. So it's really more like on a one-by-one basis, and that's well, of course, it's not as black and white, that there is sometimes some funding available, and especially when you have a larger grant, then it gives you for a couple of years freedom to be more flexible like that. But it typically, for a PhD student, you don't, for a PhD position, you really have to find an individual group that you would like to work with, and then ask that person, because it is true though, like what I just said, oh, you have to have the funding, but like I also said, you have often quite some funding available. So I would, if anybody wants to do a PhD or postdoc, I would always advise people to contact the research group that you really like, and then also, of course, explain why you want to join that group. But then I think there are quite some possibilities, but it's indeed very different. But what I'm looking for is, for a postdoc, for example, somebody that of course has already his or her own ideas about what kind of research they want to do, and that they are motivated, and that they already show, hey, I really want to be a researcher. And it's a combination of different things that I'm then looking for. But for PhD students, it can be from anywhere, and all kinds of expertise. So it's not really one person that I'm looking for.
Yeah. So do you put any extra, or like, any intentional effort to maintain diversity in the lab?
Yeah, so for me, it's automatic that I attract many females. So that's by default. I have to actually look at the other way around, that I make sure that it's diverse, enough males as well. But yes, I really like it. So of course, I cannot have from every continent people, but I really look for that. Yes. So I also think you don't want it to be too much biased to a certain, for example, if you have too many Dutch people, then the language that people speak during coffee breaks becomes Dutch, and that's not what you want. So you have to have and an international balance and diversity on many different skills. And I think it's also the more diverse people, the better.
That's so. Do you have any advices for the next generation scientists in terms of both the science or the as an academician or from a career perspective?
Yeah, I do think that even though there is a lot of pressure on that you have to fulfill the criteria and that you have to perform, I still think there is quite some room to also do it at your own pace and really go for the high quality research. And I think that is really slowly changing in the right way. So don't get scared away from all the horror stories that you hear, because it is still the best job that you can imagine, because you really can choose what you want to research. And I think that's such a luxury position. It's great.
So you value the independence of research a lot. So that is one conclusion I can take from the interaction that I've had from the previous questions as well. Yeah, that is, I completely agree that, which is why, I mean, people go for the academic route, even though people know it's a tough journey ahead. Yeah. So
yeah.
This, I have to ask this question. So you said that you have a husband who is a novelist, right? So
Yes.
so I assume that you read quite a lot of non-technical stuff. So do you have any recommendation, specifically non-Dutch recommendations of what are some of the resources or some of the books that motivated you in terms of developing your personality?
Ooh. I'm not sure if I can, because when I read, I really like novels, and then I'm not really so in terms of inspiration for life, I'm not sure if I get that out of these novels.
Mm-hmm. So you read mostly fiction.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Then yeah. So you do. So what are some of the influences that you have had in your career because of reading this fiction or reading these novels which are not from technical background?
Yeah, I do think that. So, for example, in Holland, you have a lot of discussion about what is the relation between science and art, right? So, and then I think it's nice to be married to a novel writer, because I do think that the creative process and also actually these achievements are actually very similar in these worlds. So that makes me. That kind of broadens your perspective, that it's not so narrow in terms of, hey, it's just science. So it's also nice to actually think sometimes, okay, so don't feel too important, because actually there are so many other more important things out there. So I think to basically put it a little bit in perspective, I think that's super important, that you can relate to other topics than just the science. But in general, as in really lessons, I'm not sure if there are.
Yeah, that's okay. I can understand. So let me put it in a different way. Like, what does the creation? I mean, you have a real life experience of seeing someone working on something different than what we do. What we normally do is, like, we sit around, we read a lot of papers, we find out, okay, this is something very cool. We have a dream in which this could be a really nice thing to do. So what does that creative process, like, what are the differences across in the creative process for science and art? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, because I think what is very different in art is that what you really try to do is to forget everything else, and you want to really come up with something completely new, and that is really almost the holy grail, that you really forget about all the other techniques and things that you've learned, and that you really start blank, and that you really come up with that you have the idea everything is possible, anything new can happen. And I do think in science it just doesn't work like this, so that you you build on to the knowledge that you already have. And that's actually also super fascinating, because now it advances so fast that we really learn new things, but it's always based on the knowledge that we have. So I think, for example, and if you also go onto YouTube, sometimes you see these videos of people that are saying, oh, the second law of thermodynamics is not true, right? And then as a scientist, you think, oh, well, that's nonsense. And then I sometimes wonder, like, okay, is that, how would an artist do that, right? Because then everything is possible again. And if for us, we do have our laws and things that we say, okay, this is our basis, and then we start adding on. So you are, as a scientist, you are somewhat restricted.
So there's a huge differences in the framework of the way we start thinking. Okay, yeah, I never thought of it. I mean, this is something I really wanted to ask, and I think you're the perfect person to answer this, because you have seen both the processes,
yeah.
Which is very unlikely. So that brings me to the last question that I ask people: that is there anything on your not to do list?
Not to do list.
Yeah. For example, in the past, like, people are told that, you know, they don't provide their political. Academicians do not advertise their political, agendas or like their thoughts, because they are already employed through the state. So, is there anything that is on your not to do list in terms of, in your career, in the academic career?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in Holland we don't worry about that. So we like talk about politics all the time. Yeah, that's a good question. No, I don't think
that
because
is,
of course
that is actually good.
Yeah.
If you had nothing on your not to do list, that's actually a good sign. Then you are truly free.
I don't think so. Yeah. No, and of course it's easier if you are indeed in a science like I am. So if, for example, if you have something that has ethical consequences and stuff, and that's very different type of work. And I for me, it's indeed easy. Mm-hmm. I can do whatever, and I don't have indeed things that are limiting. I don't think so. No.
That's pretty much wraps up today's session. I learned so much from you. I think I have learned a lot from a creative process, starting from that science, plus the outreach activities and the diversity and many other things in along with that. So, is there anything that you had wished that I would have asked, or is there anything you want to add at the end?
No, I've been talking all the time. So.
No, this was an exciting opportunity to talk to you, and you are probably my first non-United States person to come in so that had a timeline arrangement as well. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, and yeah, I wish you good luck.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
very nice. All right, bye.
That's it for today, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Please find the show notes at thesoftmattershow.com for more details. That is thesoftmattershow.com. You can write your questions, suggestions, and everything else to me at Amal Narayanan at thesoftmattershow.com. See you with another exciting episode soon. Until then, goodbye.